What's up everyone, my name is Sam and in this video we are going to be redoing my kitchen, so stay tuned. Now before I start the video, I want to make sure to say click that like button and make sure you subscribe to see more content from me.
So here's a quick look of the kitchen before I start doing any work. I've got some tile countertops that match the floors and it's pretty disgusting, and all the cabinets are wood along with a super outdated backsplash. Immediately jumping into work, I start taking everything off the counters and putting them in places that will be safe, and then also taking the outlet covers off and making sure that I put them in a Ziploc bag so that I don't lose anything. I also do the same with the cabinet hardware from the doors. Once all of that was put away and safe, I started ripping apart the countertops, and the first thing that I did was started to rip off this wood trim. You can see that it is just popping right out with a pry bar and it's super easy to pull off. Now I was a little worried that when I pulled this trim off that it was only going to be a layer of wood and then the tile immediately on top of it. However, that wasn't the case. There were 3 layers. You had the tile, the cement board, and the plywood. So at this point I knew it would be easier to deconstruct everything than if they laid the tile directly on top of the plywood. And that's because if they did that, I wouldn't have had access to any of the screws that were holding the plywood to the cabinet itself. And that would have made it a significantly harder process to remove the countertops without destroying the cabinets themselves. So from there I wanted to see how hard it would be to remove the backsplash from the wall, and you can see me start out with a screwdriver and then progressively get bigger with my tools of choice, from a pry bar to moving over to the Makita hammer drill. And as I was doing this, I was having big issues with the drill puncturing through the wall, so I decided to just trace everything out and just rip it out in one big piece. Now unfortunately that meant that I would have to replace all the drywall back there, but replacing the drywall is much quicker and easier than it is to skim coat over that plaster and patch holes that are already in it, so I figured I'd bite the bullet and actually just deal with it. As you can see, I jumped around a little bit and removed the backsplash before I did that last set of countertops, and that's because I didn't want to remove the sink and then make a huge mess inside of the cabinet. So after that was done, I turned off all the water lines, removed all the drains, and then disconnected everything necessary from the sink and cut the caulk and actually removed the sink from the countertop so that way I could continue ripping apart the countertops. Now jumping back into the demo, all I was doing was hammering my pry bar in between the cement board and the plywood just so that I could lift up on the tile and it was all coming up as one big piece. Now seems like a good time to tell you that when you're doing this project, make sure that you mask off the cabinets so that when you're doing all this demo, you're not dumping a bunch of dust into them. And since I didn't mask mine, I now have to go in and clean every single individual item that is in that cabinet along with the cabinet itself. So there's a pro tip, make sure you mask everything off. So from there, I immediately jumped into replacing all the drywall that I had ripped down. I used 20 minutes to finish it so that way I could apply coats consecutively without having to stop, that way I could save time. Before I started finishing the drywall, I wanted to make sure that I sanded all the cabinets down. I'm using 180 grit sandpaper so that way the paint sticks to it and doesn't start to peel after a while. This is just a good way to make sure you get the good adhesion that you need so that it's long lasting. So as you can see, I'm using this mesh tape instead of regular paper tape, and that's because the mesh tape sticks to the wall and you don't have to put any mud up before you put that tape itself up, and this just makes for a really clean, easy process when you're finishing the walls. And since we're using 20-minute joint compound, we're not going to have time to put the mud on the wall and then put the paper up and cut it and just repeat the process. That'll just cause us to waste batches of the mud. So this makes it a lot easier. Now as far as finish, you don't have to actually get it perfect. All you have to do is just get it close enough to where it's flat, because the tile mud will actually fill in the different gaps and make everything nice and flat when you go to put it up. Here's my quick finish job without sanding or anything. I'm just going to let it completely dry out, and then I'll be good to lay the backsplash right over it. Now while all the mud was drying, I decided to paint all the cabinets, and boy did I mess up a lot on these. The very first mistake I made was using a bare paint and primer in one. You don't want to use this. You're going to want to use something that has stain resistance. So after a few coats of the bare, I decided to switch over to something called gripper, and that ended up working a lot better. I think I did 2 or 3 coats of the bare and it was still turning yellow, so I switched over to the gripper and it only needed to do another 2 or 3 coats. Now while the paint was drying, it was time to start on the countertops, and I cut the 2 smaller pieces first, and that ended up being a mistake, and you'll see why later in the video. So while I was cutting these, I was using my level and clamping it to the actual surface itself, the correct distance away from where I needed to cut, and that was allowing me to get that perfectly straight line with a circular saw. That way I didn't need to use any sort of miter saw or anything. So you can kind of see here how it looks all mocked up. Nothing's screwed in, it's just sitting free floating because I haven't finished it yet, but this is a pretty good representation of what it's going to end up looking like. Now as far as the sinkhole goes, I ended up just taking the old piece and measuring the correct distance away from where the drain needs to land and just tracing it onto my new piece. So the only jigsaw blade that I had was pretty fried, so I took my circular saw and was plunging it down and in to cut the straight lines, and then I was cutting the circles with the jigsaw. Now this probably isn't the safest way to do things, but it ended up working for me, so I ran with it. So let's talk about the first mistake that I made with the countertop itself. Now I cut the 2 smaller pieces off of one singular piece of butcher block, and that ended up screwing me in the sense that I did not have enough length on this board that I needed for the countertop for the sink. So I'm going to end up having to glue 2 pieces together, and I'll go further into detail later in the video on how to do that. So jumping into my second countertop mistake, I went the same length as the other piece off of where the sink was sitting, and the sink would have ended up sitting right in my dishwasher. So I wasn't able to do that and make it work right. So I had to trim down that board again. You can see here where that first mistake was made, and I didn't have enough length to actually complete that countertop. So that's where I'm gonna cut and glue another piece in. So now checking the water lines to make sure everything fits. The cold fits fine, however the warm does not reach to where it needs to, so all I'm going to do is just extend it with another piece of hose, and that's no big deal, very easy to fix. So from here I start prepping for the extension piece to be added on, and I'm just cutting it so that it's a good fit, and also cutting the other piece to actually extend it so that everything fits and looks nice on the countertop. So once I had the boards nicely mocked up, I took them outside and drilled some Craig holes in it so that way I could run some screws and glue them together. So I anticipated this next problem happening when I screwed it together, it made a pretty fierce angle on the board because I'm only tightening it from the bottom of the board and not the top to make it level. So I had to find out a new way to actually make the boards sit straight. So what I did was I found a 2x4 that was about 10 foot long, and I ended up just clamping it to it in order to make that board completely straight. Now once I had that board sitting completely straight, there was a crevice on the bottom side, so I filled it with glue and let it sit for a couple days. And what I did was I taped the face of it so that the glue wouldn't drip through and fall out of the joint, which left me with a pretty nasty pile of glue on the top side of the counter, which I'll show you here in a second. After I finished that, I wanted to take a second and go through some different finishes that I could do. I started with a darker stain and put a couple coats on really quick, and it didn't look too bad. I was pretty happy with how it turned out, but I jumped to a clear stain, and it's just the polyurethane that I'm going to be putting on to protect the countertop, and I really like the light look of it. I also tried burning the surface of it, but normally when you burn stuff, the grain of the wood actually comes out, but none of the wood grain was popping out when I did this, so I tried scorching it and it still didn't look great, so I decided against that. And then immediately started hopping into sanding everything down and making it freaky smooth, like my high school woodshop teacher would say. And then I immediately started rolling the polyurethane on in order to seal it so that nothing stains or absorbs into the wood once I have everything set. I would not recommend rolling it because it left an orange peel like texture and I wasn't super happy with it. So if I were to do it again, I would use a brush for sure. Once all the counters were installed, I started putting the cabinet doors back on. Now I painted the inside of these off camera just in my living room on some plastic, and once I hung them up, I could start painting the faces of them. Which leads me into my next mistake that I made with the paint. I ended up brushing all the faces of the cabinets and I did not like the texture that came out. So I would use a roller in this case because you want that orange peel like texture when you finish them. Now that is me being super picky about my work, but if you're going to end up brushing them, make sure you brush with the grain of the wood so that way it all blends in and looks nice and clean. This is after the first coat of gripper. You can still see some of the wood through the paint, but after a few more coats you'll never be able to tell. I didn't show me painting the rest of the coats, but I did jump into the cabinet hardware from there, and I was poking the screw through the front because there was a little bit of paint in the hole and I didn't want the paint to rip off of the cabinet itself if I pushed it in from the back initially. So I was poking that hole and then clearing the way and then sticking the screw in from the back. I noticed the paint was sticking when all the doors were closed and I didn't want that to cause the paint to rip, so I started cutting up some of the fabric that you put on the bottom of couches and tables in order to not scratch hardwood floors, and I put it on the backs of the cabinets so that it would be a nice soft close and the paint wouldn't actually be sticking to itself. So jumping back to the countertop, this is that nasty glue splotch that I left on top of it by taping it, and I'm going to need to sand that down. So initially I tried sanding it and that was taking too long, so I grabbed my Ryobi router and 2 pieces of wood and ended up just skimming it down with the router itself. Now when you're doing this, you want to be super careful not to let the router slip off of the wood like I did. You'll see here in a second where I got a pretty big divot, but I ended up skimming more off to where that divot was basically not able to be seen. I did a quick skim coat on the walls where the tile was that I broke off just so that everything was flat, and then I started cutting in all the door trim and the ceilings and window trim. And what that is you take the paint with a brush and you go through all of the different areas that you can't reach with a roller, and you make sure that you get them with the brush so that when you're rolling you don't have to worry about getting them in the tight areas that it can't reach. Once everything was painted, I was finally able to jump into doing the tile backsplash, and I took my laser level and set it so that it was on top of the first row of tiles, and I just started running the walls and setting the tiles. Here is the finished product of the tile, and all I did was let it sit for a little while, and then it was time to hop into grouting everything to fill those little gaps that you have. And that was a super simple process. All you do is take the float, shove it in there, and then wipe it all off and clean the tile itself, and you're pretty much done. Nice and easy. You don't have to worry about getting the grout on the top part or on the bottom part where the tile meets the counter, because we're going to be caulking that and making it a nice clean line. That way you'll never be able to tell that the tile doesn't meet up perfectly to the countertop or the upper cabinets. Now when you're caulking it, you want to make sure you're using 100% silicone that is mold proof, because this is a wet area and you don't want mold to be growing on this silicone. Same when you go to put it in the sink. You want to use a clear silicone that is 100% silicone just to prevent mold. From there, it was time to put everything back together, so I put the outlet covers back on and got everything in nice looking condition and started on the floors. Now my camera died while I was doing this, so you only get to see a little bit of it, but what I was essentially doing was starting from one side and using this grip strip flooring that was really easy to install. You don't need any tools, you just need a pair of heavy duty scissors and you can pretty much install this anywhere. You also need a knife in order to snap it. But that's a quick look at the floors and how I did them. I just worked my way over from one side. And as far as caulking the gaps on the other countertops, I just put tape on both sides and then wiped it with my finger and just ripped the tape off, and it gives you a perfect line. Now as I was doing the floors, there were some spots that aren't going to be covered by the molding, so I decided to fill those with the caulk too, just to kind of blend it in and make sure it doesn't look horrible. And with that, here's the finished product of the kitchen. I'm super happy with how everything turned out. This is going to be super nice, and it's going to last a really long time with how I finished everything. I did end up putting some quarter round trim under all the cabinets, along with the piece of trim that was missing by the kitchen door. But other than that, everything is finished in this video.
So I hope you like how everything turned out, and I hope this video gave you a little bit of insight on how to do it yourself. It's not as bad as you think, it just takes a little bit of work. Now, as far as cost for this project, it came out to $1,054.74. So it is a pretty affordable project. If you wanted to cut it in half, you could skip out on doing the floors. The countertop and the flooring ended up being the bulk of the price of this whole project, in that the countertop, each piece was $229, and I bought 2 of those, and the flooring cost me $250. So it ended up taking a pretty big chunk of the price, but you could knock a lot off by not doing the floors, or only doing the floors and keeping what countertop you have. The backsplash only costs like maybe $40, definitely less than $50. So it's a pretty doable task on your own. I hope you liked this video. It was a little bit longer, so if you stuck through, I appreciate it. And make sure you click that like button and subscribe for more content, because I love doing this kind of stuff and there's definitely more to come. I'll catch you in the next one.